If you have even the remotest level of interest in warfare, history or literature, which you obviously do, that's why you're here. You will have heard of Sun Tzu's Art of War. This legendary military treatise lays out the general's general philosophy and strategy when it comes to all things warfare from both a military and a financial perspective. It lives on as a pop culture touchstone for fields as diverse as business, sport, as well as every film and TV series that wants to have a historical reference that makes them sound cultured and refined. But is it all it's cracked up to be? Today, we're going to take a look at the actual advice that this joker considers good enough to stick in a book that eBay charged me £8 whole for. If you want to have an opinion but you can't be bothered to read 60 whole pages of book and figure it out for yourself, then this is the video for you. I'm 6dead0 Hema, and you're watching 6dead0 Hema. That's rubbish. Who wrote this? The Art of War was written in approximately 500 BC, which is about 750 years before the setting of Dynasty Warriors. That's a valid historical source. And I haven't looked it up, but I have to imagine that at least 20 or 30 other books will have been written since then, so why is this particular book so cloaked in prestige? Before setting out to make this vid, I had actually read it before, and I didn't think it was all that great, but this was when I was about 14, so I'm not sure we can trust the opinion of an actual child. What I needed was a way to break it down and analyse the whole thing, see if it really was a masterwork or whether it was just a load of old tosh. But luckily for my list and itemisation oriented brain, you've seen the titles of my sparring videos, absolutely awful. The entire treatise is split into 13 chapters, each of which is split down further into separate lines, with each line being its own neat little data point. For this video, we're going to read through the whole thing and keep track of a couple of different categories. Category 1, Actual Advice. Apparently this book is full of it. If it's as decent as it's professed to be, this number will be pretty big by the end. Category 2, Actual Advice, but it's bad. We're going to want to minimise this. I want a treatise I can trust. I want to be able to take every line in it at face value and not have to pick and choose only the good bits. Category 3, Actual Advice, but it's obvious. You may think this is a little unfair given that I live 2,500 years in the future, but I don't mean things that are obvious to a modern audience. I mean things that should be obvious to even an unskilled conscript, let alone a renowned general. You'll see what I mean with this one. Category 4, Just Words. This is miscellaneous or filler content. It's necessary sometimes for context, but in quite a practical treatise, we don't want an overwhelming amount of this sort of material. Category 5, Repetition. This one I think will be quite a big category. Mr. Sun does like to hammer home his meaning to the point of excess, and there are times where it gets rather tiresome. Now, you're not going to get the whole book. It was £8. Get your own copy. Because we'd be here forever, and I should like to have lunch at some point today, but I will break down some highlights as we go through. The bits that I do skip, you can either assume that it's good advice that's not very interesting, it's obvious advice that's not really worth mentioning, it's little bits of context that aren't really significant on their own, or it's repetition that's just no longer worth repeating. So let's not wait around any longer, let's crack open this cold one and see what we got. Chapter 1, Line 1. Sun Tzu said, "The art of war is of vital importance to the state." Yeah, obviously. Let's chalk one up for just words straight away. The first real bit of meat that we get from this book is chapter 1, line 4. Here he's talking about 5 main factors to consider in warfare, and these are the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, method and discipline. And the next 6 lines, because he splits moral law across 2 lines, cheating, give us the definitions for these factors. Moral law is sort of about the cause of the army and how a good ruler inspires loyalty and obedience. Heaven is the weather conditions, earth is about physical geography, terrain. The commander is about having a good commander. It's basically the same as the moral law, but on a bit more of a local level. And by method and discipline, he means everything else that an army is supposed to have. Good organisation, chains of command, well-trained soldiers, logistics, finance. This is all good advice, but some of it's just barely. 1.13. Here are 7 questions to help you analyse the 5 main factors. All one line though. And these questions are as follows. Which of the 2 sovereigns is imbued with the moral law? Which of the 2 generals has the most ability? With whom lie the advantages derived from heaven and earth? On which side is discipline most rigorously enforced? Which army is stronger? On which side are officers and men more highly trained? Kind of the same thing. In which army is there greater constancy in both reward and punishment? Now, all of these questions sort of boil down to the same thing, which is the idea that having an advantage over your enemy is a good thing, which in 500 BC, maybe you could consider that revolutionary advice, but somehow I don't think so. 1:16. While heeding the profit of my counsel, avail yourself also of any helpful circumstances over and beyond the ordinary rules. Okay, yeah, so read my book, but if you have any of your own ideas, just sort of go for it, freestyle it, do whatever you want. I mean, it's not bad advice exactly, is it? But what am I supposed to say about that? 1:17. According as circumstances are favourable, one should modify one's plans. Well, that's a bit clearer than the last line. Be flexible, be willing to adapt your plans. That's actually good advice. 1:18. And this is a big one. All warfare is based on deception. This is a very famous line. And by it he means it's good for the enemy to not know the details of your plans or forces, and that you should actively try to make them think the opposite of whatever is true. Frankly, this is exceptionally good advice, and he gives a couple of practical examples of it over the next 7 lines. Here's a few. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. That's all line 119, by the way. That's all one line, and there's 7 lines of that, so let's chalk up a few points to repetition. Thank you. 2:1. Sun Tzu said... Yes, we get a little name drop at the start of each chapter. Sun Tzu said, in the operations of war, where there are in the field 1,000 swift chariots, as many heavy chariots, and 100,000 mail-clad soldiers, with provisions enough to carry them 1,000 li, that's a unit of distance. The expenditure at home and at the front, including entertainment of guests, small items such as glue and paint, and sums spent on chariots and armour will reach the total of 1,000 ounces of silver per day. Such is the cost of raising an army of 100,000 men. I'm really torn on this one because it kind of is giving good advice, but it does get a little bit bogged down on the details. Glue and paint? I mean, yes, warfare is expensive. I think we're going to have to put that one down as obvious. 2:5. Thus, though we have heard of stupid haste in war, cleverness has never been seen associated with long delays. Some very tasty advice, advising against rushing, but emphasising the importance of haste. Unfortunately, the advice is so good that several of the lines around it are just repeating the exact same thing again. 2:9. Bring war material with you from home, but forage on the enemy. Thus, the army will have food enough for its needs. This line and several lines about it are talking about resource management, i.e., don't overburden yourself, spend resources wisely. If you can, adopt improvised tactics such as nicking food off your dead enemy. 2:16. Now, in order to kill the enemy, our men must be roused to anger, that there may be advantage from defeating the enemy. They must have their rewards. This is pretty good advice. The next couple of lines are repeating it, but they sort of do expand and give it a more practical example of how to actually apply this. 2:17. Therefore, in chariot fighting, when 10 or more chariots have been taken, those should be rewarded who took the first. Our own flag should be substituted for those of the enemy, and the chariots mingled and used in conjunction with ours. The captured soldiers should be kindly treated and kept. 2:18. This is called using the conquered foe to augment one's own strength. Yeah, that's what it's called, yeah. 2:19. In war then, let your great object be victory. Good advice. Not lengthy campaigns, you've just said that. 3:2. Hence, to fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. After all warfare is deception, this is maybe the most famous line in the whole book. On the face of it, this is good advice, but the problem with this is that you can't always be in control of that. If your enemy has not read The Art of War, then it's very probable that you will be fighting out on the field. This line almost feels like high-level philosophy rather than actual strategic advice, but there are some other lines in this chapter that do give it a bit more context and make it a bit more practical. But we are going to gloss over them because I can't be bothered to do every single line. 3:18. Hence the saying, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Know yourself and know your enemy. It's almost words masquerading as advice. In a way, it's kind of self-referential as well, like he's saying his advice is to follow his advice. It's a neat little quote though, and it does sum up the whole chapter quite well. 4:1 through 4:4. Sun Tzu said, "The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat, then waited for the opportunity of defeating the enemy. To secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself. Thus, the good fighter is able to secure himself against defeat, but cannot make certain of defeating the enemy. Hence the saying, one may know how to conquer without being able to do it." He goes on like this for a little while, and I think it may actually be bad advice. Defense is absolutely an important part of warfare, and to ignore it will lead to defeat. However, there are parts of this, especially the second line, where it almost seems like he's saying you could kind of ignore offense and just focus purely on defense. And that's not a great way to fight. As a historical fencer, I can tell you, if all you do is defend and wait for your opponent to give you an opportunity to hit them, eventually your defense will fail. No defense is perfect, and that does include your opponent's, but if all you do is just defend, you will find that your own defense is not perfect as well. It's just as likely that your own defense will fail before your opponent gives you a clean opportunity. Some risk-taking is necessary for victory. The perfect conditions just may never present themselves. 4:8. To see victory only when it is within the ken of the common herd is not the acme of excellence. What he's talking about here is that winning an easy victory doesn't necessarily make you a good commander, but he goes on about it so much that he's almost saying winning an easy victory in itself is not worth it. We see this in fencing as well. Often you'll want to win in some sort of really clever or flashy way, but we do have to remember that an easy victory that anyone could achieve is still a victory, and it is absolutely worth taking. 4:11 and 4:12. What the ancients called a clever fighter is one who not only wins, but excels in winning with ease. Hence, his victories bring him neither reputation for wisdom nor credit for courage. Okay, make your mind up, because now you agree with what I was just saying. 4:19. A victorious army opposed to a routed one is as a pound's weight placed in the scale against a single grain. A victorious army is better than a defeated one. This man knows his beans, that's for sure. 5:1. Sun Tzu said, "The control of a large force is the same principle as the control of a few men. It is merely a question of dividing up their numbers." I'm not sure it is, to be honest with you. You can command a small force directly, but when it's a bigger force, you're going to have to be commanding through officers. And when it's a bigger force still, those officers will be delegating through officers themselves, and each one of these agents introduces a new point of failure. If you could guarantee perfect communication, discipline, and loyalty, then it would make sense, but you just can't overlook the human factor in this. Given enough error points, there will eventually be an error. There's not any other specific points to discuss in this chapter, it's quite wishy-washy. 5:7. There are not more than 5 musical notes, yet the combinations of these 5 give rise to more melodies than can ever be heard. 5:13. The quality of decision is like the well-timed swoop of a falcon, which enables it to strike and destroy its victim. It's all aphorisms sort of along these lines, either that or he's banging on about stones and eggs. 6:1. Sun Tzu said, "Whoever is first in the field and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever is second in the field and has to hasten to battle will arrive exhausted." This whole chapter is a bit of a mixed bag, really. There is some quite good advice in it, but a lot of it is repetitions of line 113, i.e. having an advantage over an enemy is a good thing. 6:2. Therefore, the clever combatant imposes his will on the enemy, but does not allow the enemy's will to be imposed on him. Again, clarifying that advantages are advantageous. 6:7. You can be sure of succeeding in your attacks if you only attack places which are undefended. You can ensure the safety of your defence if you only hold positions that cannot be attacked. I mean, attack places which are undefended. It's not really strategy. Frankly, it's moving past obvious and tiptoeing into the realm of absolute valuelessness. £8 whole I paid for this. 6-9. O divine art of subtlety and secrecy! Through you we learn to be invisible, through you inaudible, and hence we can hold the enemy's fate in our hands. Bloody hell, he's soliloquizing. 6-15. And if we are able to thus attack an inferior force with a superior one, our opponents will be in dire straits. See, this is the kind of thing that I remember reading when I read it a long time ago. Not only is it obvious, not only is it repeated throughout the whole book, but we just said this exact point 5 minutes ago with slightly different words. This is the ancient Chinese equivalent of saying, get good. 6-21. Though according to my estimate the soldiers of Wei exceed our own in number, that should advantage them nothing in the matter of victory. I say then that victory can be achieved. See, that's the opposite of what you were just saying. When we have superior numbers, it's really good for us. But when the enemy has superior numbers, don't worry, it's still really good for us because we're oh so clever. 6-27. All men can see the tactics whereby I conquer, but what none can see is the strategy out of which victory is evolved. Well, they might be able to see your strategy now, mate, because you've written a book about it. 7-11. Yeah, we're starting at 11. We may take it then that an army without its baggage train is lost. Without provisions, it is lost. Without bases of supply, it is lost. This is sensible and good advice, but it's taken us 11 lines to get there. Some of them are touching on other subjects, but a lot of it is just a long-winded example leading to this conclusion. It's good, but my word is there some waffle on the way. 7-12. We cannot enter into alliances until we are acquainted with the designs of our neighbours. This is pretty good advice. It's sensible not to rush into agreements where you can't necessarily see what your potential ally is actually planning to get out of the agreement. I've got no idea why it's plonked as a standalone line in the middle of this chapter on manoeuvring though. 7-15. In war, practice dissimulation, and you will succeed. This is nearly a word-for-word repeat of all warfare is deception with no extra context or examples added. 7-19. Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt. I did say I was going to stop banging on about repetition, didn't I? But this is a 2-for-1. The deception thing and some of the earlier points about the benefit of haste. 7-21. Ponder and deliberate before you make a move. Quite obvious advice, and any commander that would have benefited from this advice has probably already rushed headlong onto battlefield and died without bothering to read this book first, I'd have thought. 7-22. He will conquer who has learnt the artifice of deviation. I know, I said I would stop banging on about repetition, but come on, Sonny T. You literally just said this. You don't have to say it 500 times. Reading this book is like losing my memory. I keep thinking I've skipped back 10 pages and I'm reading the same section again and again. 7-36. When you surround an army, leave an outlet free. Do not press a desperate foe too hard. Pretty good advice, actually. Works on an individual level as well as a more global scale. An enemy with nothing to lose and no way out is dangerous and unpredictable. 7-37. Such is the art of warfare. Is it? There's 6 whole chapters left in this book yet, mate. 8-1. I don't think you're getting a sense of what it's like to read this book. Let me read this line. Sun Tzu said, "In war, the general receives his commands from the sovereign, collects his army, and concentrates his forces." Now let me read this line. 7-1. Sun Tzu said, "In war, the general receives his commands from the sovereign." 8-1. Sun Tzu said, "In war, the general receives his commands from the sovereign." In war, the general receives his commands from the sovereign. I had to go back and check. It's the same line. It's the same line with just a little bit tacked on the end. 8-11. The art of war teaches us to rely not on the likelihood of the enemy's not coming, but on our own readiness to receive him. Not on the chance of his not attacking, but rather on the fact that we have made our position unassailable. It's pretty good advice all round. See, I'm not just cherry-picking the bad stuff. Don't rely on your enemy's faults, rely on your own strengths. Always be prepared for the worst possible disadvantage, and then everything else is an advantage. 8-12 through 8-14. There are 5 dangerous faults which may affect a general. Recklessness, which leads to destruction. Cowardice, which leads to capture. A hasty temper, which can be provoked by insults. A delicacy of honour, which is sensitive to shame, and over-solicitude for his men, which exposes him to worry and trouble. These are the 5 besetting sins of a general, ruinous to the conduct of war. When an army is overthrown and its leader slain, the cause will surely be found amongst these 5 dangerous faults. Let them be a subject of meditation. Yeah, okay, good advice, good faults, but the cause will surely be found amongst these 5 dangerous faults. These are the only 5 faults that can ever happen. What's the rest of the book about then? 9:1 through 9:2. Sun Tzu said, "We come now to the question of encamping the army, and observing signs of the enemy. Pass quickly over the mountains, and keep in the neighbourhood of valleys. Camp in high places, facing the sun. Do not climb heights in order to fight. So much for mountain warfare." So much for mountain warfare.
Such a snarky sister.
9:14. When, in consequence of heavy rains up country, a river which you wish to ford is swollen and flecked with foam, you must wait until it subsides. This line's kind of typical for this chapter. It's hard to know what to make of it. On the one hand, it's good advice. On the other hand, it's kind of obvious. On the other hand,
Yes, the third hand.
this kind of goes against some previous advice. There are situations where we're instructed that it's better to flee, and when we're stuck between a superior pursuing force and an obstacle which we're told should be avoided at all costs, what exactly are we supposed to do? I suppose it's left up to the commander, but isn't this the exact kind of situation that you might come to this book looking for practical advice for? 9:20. If the enemy's place of encampment is easy of access, he is tendering a bait. Or maybe he's stupid and you should seize the advantage. Or maybe I'm stupid and I'd fall for the bait. 9:23. When there is dust rising in a high column, it is the sign of chariots advancing. When the dust is low but spread over a wide area, it betokens the approach of infantry. When it branches out in different directions, it shows that parties have been sent to collect firewood. A few clouds of dust moving to and fro signify the enemy is encamping. This is really good, really practical, specific advice. This is a standout example of what this book does well. 9:27. When there is much running about and all the soldiers fall into rank, it means the critical moment has come. Yep, probably. 9:39. If the enemy's troops march up angrily and remain facing ours for a long time without either joining battle or taking themselves off again, the situation is one that demands great vigilance and circumspection. Pretty similar to the last point. Yeah, if the enemy just comes and stands right near you and doesn't move, you should probably pay attention to that and not just go back to bed or whatever. 9:45. If a general shows confidence in his men, but always insists on his orders being obeyed, the gain will be mutual. This is summing up a few lines where we're talking about fostering good relations with your soldiers. This may well be one of the key lines in this treatise that will have a definite positive impact on the people reading it for military use. Of course, not every commander would have been a despot, but some of them would have been, and some of them will have read this book, and some of them will have taken this advice on board and probably gone on to achieve greater success than they would have done if they just treated their troops like absolute rubbish. 10:2 through 10:3. The ground which can be freely traversed by both sides is called accessible ground. With regard to ground of this nature, be before the enemy to occupy the raised and sunny spots and carefully guard your line of supplies. Then you'll be able to fight with advantage. He really loves his sunny spots, doesn't he? That's nominative determinism at work. 10:12. If you are situated at a great distance from the enemy, and the strength of the two armies is equal, it is not easy to provoke a battle, and fighting will be to your disadvantage. Okay, how? Both armies are presumably located in the same dimension, so the distance between them is the same from both armies' perspectives, and if the distance is causing you to be at a disadvantage, then surely the distance is also causing your enemy to be at a disadvantage. I think what's being said here might be that in this situation you should seek alternative means of resolving the war, but if you're not having battles, are you having a war, or are you just having a bit of a falling out? 10:19. When a general, unable to estimate the enemy's strength, allows an inferior force to engage a larger one, or hurls a weak detachment against a powerful one, and also neglects to have placed picked soldiers in the front rank, the result must be rout. Did you know that when you lose, that's when you lose? 10.23. If fighting is sure to result in victory, then you must fight, even though the ruler forbid it. If fighting will not result in victory, then you must not fight, even at the ruler's bidding. Hang on, let's look at 10.17. When the higher officers are angry and insubordinate, and on meeting the enemy give battle on their own account from a feeling of resentment, before the commander-in-chief can tell whether or not he is in a position to fight, the result is ruin. Okay, so when a general disobeys a ruler, that's good. But when a high officer disobeys a general, that's ruin. Maybe when a general thinks that he's right no matter what, that's arrogance. 11. The first 14 lines of this chapter are describing different situations or locations your army can be in and giving a hot tip for each one. Nothing funny or interesting to say about it, it's just a long section of good, standard, genuine military treatise. Although these descriptions are repeated nearly exactly towards the end of the chapter, so we're losing some points for repetition there. 11.20. The following are the principles to be observed by an invading force. The further you penetrate into a country, the greater will be the solidarity of your troops, and thus the defenders will not prevail against you. It would be generous to call this progressive, by which I mean other commanders of the time might consider being really deep into enemy territory to be quite dangerous, but Old Man's Son is something of an optimist. In fact, his only advice in line 11.13 for being deep in enemy territory is to gather in plunder. This point is repeated several times later in the chapter as well. 11.23. Throw your soldiers into positions whence there is no escape, and they will prefer death to flight. If they will face death, there is nothing they may not achieve. Officers and men alike will put forth their uttermost strength. I may be being a bit ungenerous in taking this as advice rather than commentary, but this seems to be against the core philosophy of the entire treatise. It's a very strange line. It would make sense the opposite way, like, be wary of an enemy in a desperate situation because they may be capable of great acts. But I think intentionally putting your army in harm's way with the hopes that they'll accomplish some sort of miracle is misguided. 11.26. Prohibit the taking of omens, and do away with superstitious doubts. Then, until death itself comes, no calamity need be feared. This is pretty progressive for a text that's 2,500 years old. Probably at the time a lot of people would have been very heavily into omens and they would have allowed them to guide their entire strategy, but this man? Not for him. 11.34. Thus the skillful general conducts his army just as though he were leading a single man, willy-nilly, by the hand. I'm not sure sound tactical advice has ever been described as willy-nilly, either before or since this text was written. Maybe there's some sort of quirk of translation here, but that's a great line. 11.40. To muster his host and bring it into danger. This may be termed the business of the general. This line is summing up a little section where he's talking about deception again, but not deceiving your enemy, deceiving your own forces. The suggestion being that in order to bring your army into a situation that they might not be thrilled to enter into, it may be necessary to lie to your troops and even to your officers. It's maybe sensible advice if you don't view your troops as human, which the rest of the treatise does put quite particular emphasis on treating them with mutual respect. 11.65. If the enemy leaves a door open, you must rush in. So, we come again to this running contradiction.
I'm not sure if I mentioned it or not amongst the sea of repetitions.
Being advised to seize every advantage that's presented to you, but also being advised that it's probably bait and you shouldn't take it. I suppose it's being left up to the particular commander to work out from the context of the situation, but come on. Make your mind up. Pick a side. 12.5 through 12.10. In attacking with fire, one should be prepared to meet 5 possible developments. 1. When fire breaks out inside the enemy's camp, respond at once with an attack from without. 2. If there's an outbreak of fire, but the enemy soldiers remain quiet, bide your time and do not attack. 3. When the force of the flames has reached its height, follow up with an attack. If that is practicable, if not, stay where you are. 4. If it is possible to make an assault with fire from without, do not wait for it to break out from within, but deliver your attack at a favourable moment. 5. When you start a fire, be to windward of it. Do not attack from the leeward. This is a very specific chapter with, in the context of the time, some very heavy technical detail on the best time of the year and the best time of the day and the best methods for making successful fire attacks. This chapter is perhaps the best one in the entire treatise. It sets out a clear purpose and delivers meaningful and relevant information. 12:16 through 12:17. Hence the saying, the enlightened ruler lays his plans well ahead, the good general cultivates his resources. Move not unless you see an advantage. Use not your troops unless there is something to be gained. Fight not unless the position is critical. Never mind, we immediately drop back into repeating advice from earlier chapters and just tacking it on the back end of a chapter about something completely different just to pad it out a bit. 12:19. If it is to your advantage, make a forward move. If not, stay where you are. Oh good, we're repeating advice from one line before as well. 13:2. Hostile armies may face each other for years, striving for the victory which is decided in a single day. This being so, to remain in ignorance of the enemy's condition simply because one grudges the outlay of 100 ounces of silver in honours and emoluments is the height of inhumanity. Another great example of the general's pragmatism and humanitarianism. A little cost is worth it if it's going to help you save a lot of lives. 13:5 through 13:6. Now, this foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits, it cannot be obtained inductively from experience, nor by any deductive calculation. Knowledge of the enemy's dispositions can only be obtained from other men. Maybe it's because we're right near the end of the book now, but I don't really have anything to say about this. I just liked it. It's quite succinct, and the tone is almost not patronising exactly, but it's like an exasperated parent explaining something to a child. Very entertaining. 13:18. Be subtle, and use your spies for every kind of business. So performative. 13:19. If a secret piece of news is divulged by a spy before the time is ripe, he must be put to death, together with the man to whom the secret was told. Bloody hell, that's a change of tone. We were just having fun with some theatrical language and now we're into executions. What a change of pace. In all seriousness, this last chapter is another pretty good one, which lays out a systematic approach to using several different types of spies and ways in which they can all benefit from feeding off of each other's information. It's a solid end to the book. And that's that. That is The Art of War abridged. So, what do we make of all that? 342 lines of delicious military advice.
That's a hearty meal.
Now you will see there is actually a point to that massive spreadsheet I showed you earlier. Fancy some dessert? I got you some pie. 128 lines of good advice. 26 lines of bad advice. 60 lines of obvious advice. 128 lines of just words. Quite honestly, this is not a bad spread. Over a third of the book is genuinely good advice. Another third is giving it some context and structure, and only the final third is useless. I mean, I say only. Having a third of the entire thing be worthless is not a brilliant look, but you have to remember that I thought it was going to be a lot worse than that. However, it's not quite the full story. Fancy some more dessert? How about a slightly different pie? 176 lines do not get repeated at all and stand completely on their own merit, but 166 lines, nearly half the entire treatise, is comprised of lines that are mentioned more than once. If we're generous and say that each of the repeated lines has only one repeat, that would mean that a complete quarter of the work could just be cut out because it's just exactly repeated content. But what exactly is repeated? Well, I haven't come up with a full list of everything because it would be very long, but I have come up with a list of 12 key points, 12 key takeaways from this treatise. This is The Art of War abridged. Key point 1. A good leader inspires loyalty and obedience. This is repeated 7 times. Key point 2. Having an advantage over your enemy is a good thing. This is repeated 33 times. Key point 3. Be willing to adapt your plans. This is repeated 6 times. Key point 4. All warfare is based on deception. This is repeated 49 times. Key point 5. Quick, decisive victory is beneficial. Avoid delays where practical. This is repeated 12 times. Key point 6. Avoid unnecessary expense. Use all available resources wisely. This is repeated 7 times. Key point 7. Motivate your soldiers, especially with rewards or respect. This is repeated 11 times. Key point 8. Minimize risk, especially by winning without fighting. This is repeated 11 times. Key point 9. Give good commands that make sense and foster trust with your soldiers. This is repeated 5 times. Key point 10. Rely on defense more than offense. This is repeated 4 times. Key point 11. Manage resources and supply chain effectively. In itself, it's kind of a repeat of 6, but it is subtly different. This is repeated 10 times. Key point 12. Know your environment. For number 12 here is maybe a little unfair because a lot of it is not direct repetition. There are specific examples and advice given for different kinds of environmental conditions. Don't cross this river, stick to this kind of ground, things like that. So I haven't included this as part of the data I showed you on those pie charts. However, if you want to see how much of the book this is, I did count it up and it's something like 80 to 100 lines. Now, the longest chapter is 68 lines and around 20 of those lines are contextual, meaning the longest chapter is about 40 lines of actual life long, which means 2.5 full chapters of this book can be boiled down to simply know your environment. But why is there so much repetition? How could one person forget that they've written down this exact point literally 5 minutes before writing it down again? Well, is Sun Tzu one person? This idea that Sun Tzu may not have been a real historical figure is not purely based on my own deduction. As far back as the 12th century, scholars noted that the Zhuao,
A historical narrative of the spring and autumn period of Chinese history during which Sun Tzu apparently lived,
does not mention Sun Tzu even once, which is odd because every other historical figure from this period is mentioned several times in this text. There are several theories about the true authorship of The Art of War. Is Sun Tzu a synonym for an unknown warlord? Was it actually written much later by a descendant of the Sun family? But the one that makes the most sense to me is that this treatise is actually the compilation of several works all gathered into one place. This would explain why there's repetition of very similar points across different chapters, as well as why we have entire chapters discussing very similar topics to each other. I believe one general, probably someone from the Wu dynasty given the authorship is attributed to the Sun family, gathered up individual minor works from various sources and rewrote them all into one singular source. Do I have any evidence for this? Not directly. It is common practice for historical text to be written in this manner, with several texts from the Chinese tradition being known to have been written this way, but mostly it just kind of feels right to me. Now, with all of that being said, do I really think I know better than some guy from 2,500 years ago who may not have even existed? Well, no, not really. The Art of War is an extraordinary work, if nothing else because of its legacy. It's remained relevant for literally millennia. Can you think of any other book from 2,500 years ago that's even still in print, let alone still in the cultural zeitgeist? Well, yes, I can actually think of several others off the top of my head, but I'm not going to talk about them because it really undermines my point. There are plenty of instances of quite obvious advice in this book, as well as some instances of some truly bad advice, but there are also nuggets of real wisdom. It does a good job of collecting some of the fundamentals of good practice into one concentrated place. It is a mixed bag though, because the way it's structured makes it easy to draw lots of little bite-sized quotes that in isolation sound truly brilliant, but in the context of the whole work really add little to no meaningful input. And for many of these quotes, you could use one of 10 or 15 different quotes from across various different points throughout the work, which all broadly, sometimes nearly in exactly the same words, say the same thing. But then ultimately, the goal of the book, I think if it can be derived into one singular goal, is to have less death both in your own forces and in your enemy's forces, which I think is quite a noble ideal. I think on the whole, I'd have to conclude that it's a very interesting text. It's well worth a read for yourself. Definitely, I would recommend this to anyone who, again, has the remotest interest in this sort of historical literature. And you may even find a little lesson or two in there that you can apply to your own life. But if we're in some sort of work meeting together and you decide to quote Sun Tzu at me, I shall scream. But from me, that's all for now. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.
I will show you the greatest nightmare.
You can actually get it for about £4, or even a digital copy for free if you don't shop around for a book with a fancy cover that'll look good in a stupid video. Why are you still watching this?